Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. Jeremy Werner and Joey Wagner with you as we get to talk about Illinois adding 3 commitments to the class of 2025. They bring in 3-star Indiana wide receiver Davion Chandler, 3-star defensive lineman out of Homewood Flossmoor Cameron Brooks, and 3-star Indiana defensive lineman Isaiah White, adding 3 commitments out of this first big official visit weekend that we talked about. Joey, how are you, man? And what's your kind of big takeaway coming off this big weekend?
I'm good. Official visit weekends are fun because it's, we're sitting there texting on Sunday, like, okay, here, I'll try to get him. And you just don't know which one of those guys is going to pop. Isaiah White and Davion Chandler were 2 that I don't know that we had as high up on our possibility list. Certainly they obviously were, but Cameron Brooks made sense. So my big takeaway is they're still good at these weekends. They are. And I know it's only 3. And as you mentioned, there weren't as many layups. There weren't as many no Power 5 guys commit on your official. But they're in the battle for a lot of these guys. And I think they do a really, really good job hosting these guys on these weekends. I texted you Saturday, Jeremy, Sunday. They got to win more games. They do. And you want to see them get into the top 15 in the state of Illinois, start being in more of those battles. But I really believe in the process of Brett Bielema and his coaching staff and the way they go about this. I think he's brought the right guys in the building. You can look at Justin Stepp, who got a big commitment. Clint Sinham had a few big targets on campus. I know Jeremy will talk about those guys. Dre Brown, bringing him back, recognizing the value of Pat Embleton. Like, you see the framework of a program that has its process right. Now you've got to translate that into winning games. I think that would also translate on the recruiting trails. You move up in the state. But that's my big takeaway is I believe in what they're doing. I do. And I'm assuming, maybe there'll be another guy or 2 from this first weekend that pops. But I think the process is really, really sound.
Yeah, even if they don't land some of the guys, like we've talked about this top 10 in the state all the time, and you can move that goalpost to top 12 or top 15 in this class, whatever you want. But like, I don't think they could have done anything better for Chris Burgess Jr., Nathaniel Marshall. It's just, they're not Michigan. They're not Notre Dame right now. So that stuff has to play out. And sometimes that's a process of building up a program. Maybe like Mark Stoops did at Kentucky, right? Where you win games, you get to bowl games more often, then all of a sudden you're getting more of those 4-star top 247 talents. But I agree with you. I think the process makes sense to me. Like the way they're going about recruiting the Midwest, and we'll dive into Indiana here in a second. The way they're going about, getting in early on a lot of these in-state kids, their outreach in the in-state kids, and you get a couple in-staters, all of a sudden you have Andre Levette and Braden Trimble and Carson Boyd and O'Fallon kid recruiting for you, and that helps you get more in-state kids. All these things make sense to me. So I think the process is sound, and whether it works or not probably depends on if they get the most, if they evaluate well, they get the right talent, but they're winning more Power 5 battles. They're getting in on the right kids. They're getting more of these 4-star prospects on campus. And then once they get them on campus, Joey, as Brett Bielema said confidently, and I think he's earned that, like we get them on official visits, we feel like we have a chance. And that's why these weekends are so important. You don't have a chance if you don't get them on official visits, unless you lock them up early, right? And you get them on official visit or after they've already committed. So to get a Jesse Harold, the Donovan Darden, a Charles Bass, a TJ Alford, who's committed to Ohio State, to get those guys on campus is a huge step. But then to be able to close on guys, Cameron Brooks, you close on him. That's a guy we have been sitting there going, I've had to crystal ball in for months on him. That's one you had to close this weekend. But to win Power 4 battles for Davion Chandler, who you just offered a month ago, Isaiah White, you just offered 2 months ago, I think that tells you how strong they are on these official visits.
Yeah, that was what I was going to mention about what stands out is in the case of Chandler and White, like they're, I say new to the commitment, just in the sense of you compare them to a guy like a Cameron Brooks, who they've been on forever, and their pitch was strong enough to say, hey, you don't need to go visit, your next. Isaiah White had a visit scheduled to Boston College and Washington, if I'm not mistaken. Hey, you don't need to do that. We can get what you want here, and you're still close to home. And they were able to build that relationship over the course of 2 months with him, 2.5 months. Like, that stands out. Like, that's not – we've seen them do well with guys like Brooks, or as you mentioned, Levette, that's like, All right. Well, it's 2022, and we're talking to these guys on the sidelines of a football game, and they're not anywhere near committing. But it's the process of building those, and I just think it shows that they can do it kind of both ways. It's not always going to be, the hit rate that those two were, but to be able to kind of speed those relationship building processes up with those two, and blend that with guys you've been on for a while, like that's maybe not something we have seen as much early on as they were getting their footing, but I think you're seeing it now, and there's development they can sell there as well, especially at those two positions that Chandler and White play.
Yeah, Cameron Brooks is the 5th in-state commit in this class, and I think it's a pretty solid class in state. Like, I feel like we're repeating ourselves when it comes to this. The top 10, top 15 are really hard. Notre Dame, Michigan, like those are the schools that are landing those guys. Last year, it's like Alabama and Georgia are coming in. Like Georgia with Taylor out of Geneva, like great wide receiver. Those guys are coming in for the top ones. But that next tier, that second tier really of prospect, I hate calling it that, but it truly is when it comes to recruitments. Illinois is doing pretty well. They're winning battles. They now have 4 of the top 25 in the state. And if you added Carson Boyd to that, he would have been a top 25 guy. And the difference between the number 8 or number 9 and the number 24 guy is like 1 point in the rating system. So, but that tier of guy, they're doing really well for it. So to add Brooks to what they already have with Andre Levette, Michael McDonough, Carson Boyd, Braden Trimble, those are recruitments Illinois is winning more and more of in the state. We'll see if they can get more than Malik Elsie's, Caden Fagans as they go along. But those guys are the kind of type that I think we just have to remind people they weren't getting mostly under Lovie Smith, of course, after his first year. And then Tim Beckman wasn't getting a lot of those guys either. So that's a step in the right direction. But Midwest, Joey, Lovie Smith kind of abandoned the Midwest late in his tenure. He tried early in his tenure. And one of those states he kind of abandoned early. I remember a bus of Indianapolis kids came over early in his tenure for a camp. But Indiana, I mean, it's right across the border. I mean, we are 40 minutes from crossing over the eastern border to getting into Indiana, and only 2 hours from Indianapolis, which is just another city like St. Louis, Chicago, that is so close. We talk about this triangle and how Illinois could be a sleeping giant because of the talent within that 2 hour, really 3 hour radius of Illinois. Well, they'd only gotten one guy since the class of 2016 from Indiana. That's Hunter Whiteneck, who had no other Power 5 offer. Cincinnati was in the AAC at the time. That seems crazy. Like it is right there. But like you've seen George McDonald working Indiana the last couple of years. He's from Fort Wayne. You've seen Terrence Jameson get more into there. Bart Miller, I know, has recruited there as well. And then you add Dre Brown to this staff. And it feels like you've had a real breakthrough getting 2 kids that were Power 5, Power 4, no doubt prospects. And Davion Chandler, who's top 10 in the state, chose you over Indiana, Wisconsin, didn't even visit those programs, who were in his top 2 basically a month ago. Justin Stepp walks in, prioritizes him, offers him, gets to his high school the same day, basically. And he pushes and closes that one down. And then to get Isaiah White, I think Terrence Jameson's doing a really good job. We can talk about him here in a second, but to get those 2 guys and to get Tyrone Burris on campus, it feels like this is a real breakthrough because those are the first guys they've landed and really gotten an official visit from since they landed Whiteneck 3 years ago.
Yeah, you're right. And Indianapolis it's 2 hours. It's 2 hours from my front door. I live in Champaign. I mean, it's such a – now, the other side of the coin is everyone recruits Indianapolis because it is very centrally located in the Big Ten. That's why media days and everyone prefers that we go to Indianapolis for things because everyone can get there pretty easily. Real quick, am I mistaken? If I'm remembering right, and you would know better than I would, didn't Lovie try to go back? Like, didn't Rod Smith kind of have Indiana in some capacity, but like – I feel like by that point it was too late, right? I mean, it just didn't. There was nothing like so. They kind of entertained the idea of floating back there, but it never really got any traction. So it makes sense for Brett Bielema and this coaching staff to try to get over there and try to see if they can make some headway in that state because there's talent there. And
well, in the 80s they did really well. The 80s they did really well recruiting there. But like it's weird that. You think of the last 15 years of the program, Ted Karras was a phenomenal get out of Indiana, but it's right across the border and they're barely making a headway. We're not talking about I'm not expecting Illinois to go in there and beat Purdue out.
Shop. Yeah.
Notre Dame and Michigan, Ohio State. Like you said, all these schools, just like in Chicago, they're recruiting them. But just to land one over the last 9 years is insane to me. So if you can land one or two of those in every class, like that's just another recruiting territory you can go to, like Michigan, like Wisconsin, like St. Louis, Ohio. You're not going to get a ton. Like you're not going to get 7, 8 guys, I don't think, out of there. But if you can get one or two, that can really help you.
Yeah, that was my next point is you feel like they made some traction since Brett Bielema has been hired and this coaching staff has been hired in the state of Illinois. And like objectively, we just talked about it. They have made that traction. And now you're seeing them kind of expand that Midwestern footprint. Wisconsin was a place they'd obviously had ties, right? Bart Miller went up there early on in his tenure. You mostly seen offensive linemen in terms of coming down to Illinois from the state of Wisconsin. But Terrence Jameson knows Michigan, knows Ohio. Obviously, Corey Parker now has that area. And then you get into Indiana a little bit. Again, you're not going to go get 5 guys from those states in every recruiting class, right? But to be able to go over there and get guys that you believe in your evaluation, like that's meaningful too. And then you supplement that with places that we've already seen, Florida, New Jersey. We'll see if they can really get traction in the state of Texas, which is obviously something Brett Bielema has pointed out. But I just think you're starting to see that Midwestern footprint kind of expand a little bit in those relationships that have been building over the course of 2-3 years with this coaching staff in those states. And before that, obviously, these guys have all had Power 5 jobs or had college football jobs prior to coming to Illinois. Like that's starting to turn up a little bit more. So this class so far, it's been Indiana. Last class, it was Ohio, was a little bit more with, especially on the defensive line with Angelo McCollum and Demetrius John. And you'll see that a little bit. And I think that's important to supplement what you're doing in the state of Illinois. And obviously, Florida is going to continue to be a big deal for them.
Yeah, you got to give credit to Terrence Jameson, who recruited at Purdue, by the way. So he's got some familiarity with Indiana. So credit him for getting in the Midwest and finding some of these defensive linemen. Jeremiah Warren out of Michigan. You said Ohio, Demetrius John and Angelo McCollum, right? Out of Ohio. Eddie Turk last year out of the state of Illinois. So to land those guys, to land Cameron Brooks, who I was surprised, but Alan True wrote up, could be under consideration for a top 15, top 10 prospect in the state of Illinois. It's getting better. Like the defensive line recruiting had to get better, and it is. So what a weekend for Terrence Jameson, Joey. And we've been talking about for years how Illinois needs to recruit better on the defensive line. And you go back 2021, they didn't sign a defensive lineman in that class that they didn't get anybody in that class. The class before it was Ced McConnell. After, you had this in between of Brett Bielema getting hired and Lovie Smith getting fired. You had one guy that you signed, and Ced McConnell had a couple Power 5 offers. But then 2022, they got some guys they like, and they've talked up all these guys, Alex Bray, Jeremiah Warren, Pat Farrell, but none of those had another Power 5 offer, right? But 2023, Eddie Turk had 17 Power 5 offers. Demetrius John, 6. Angelo McCollum, 3. Now Isaiah White, 7. Cameron Brooks, 6. These are the type of battles you have to win to make a Big Ten defensive line, right? I mean, it's hard to outdevelop recruiting in defensive line because you have to have a size, you have to have an athleticism, and the supply of them is smaller than the demand. So you got to win these kind of battles. So the future of the defensive line certainly looks brighter with the recruiting battles you're going to have. That's not to say Alex Bray's not going to be good, because they think he's going to be very good. Brett Bielema they just talked up Pat Farrell, Jeremiah Warren. I love what he looks like. I haven't seen him play a lot, obviously, but he's got talent too. So it's not to say those guys aren't going to win, but they have more Power 5 offers, you feel better about the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's always going to be a cliff coming on the defensive line for the reasons that you mentioned. And now you're seeing that other end of that, and they've had to address it in the transfer portal. And it's competitive there too, right? Like you want to win these guys out of high school where, maybe it's less financially important to, it may be less important to have a financial bag waiting for some of these defensive linemen.
Unless you're recruiting those top 247 guys, it might be a little expensive stuff.
That's right. Yeah. But I mean, again, our expectation is Illinois is in the battle for Power 5 guys who maybe aren't in that 247. At least that's the way I see it right now. So yeah, to go out and to get an Isaiah White, we've been trying to reach him. I would feel like nose guard and the development, their nose tackle, the development that Terrence Jameson has had there, that must have played because that is certainly his position. He is a big guy. I think he moves pretty well for being a big guy, but like that must have resonated with him. Cameron Brooks, his coach told me he's up to 295. That is a very, very steep increase of weight. So, we'll see. I mean, I don't have any reason to doubt the guy. He sees him every single day. Let's see how he plays with that. Now, that would obviously move him, as he mentioned, to more of a 3-tech on the defensive line. But like those are two guys that you would like to see be anchors of your defensive line in, 2 years, 3 years, whatever that case is. And
2027.
Yeah. You pair those with an Eddie Turk and Angelo McCollum, Alex Bray. Like, I like the pieces they have there. And now, this coaching staff believes in its ability to develop, to identify, to recruit, and develop. Now you're in that development portion, and some of those guys are probably going to be asked to be ready earlier. Alex Bray, as we mentioned, maybe Jeremiah Warren. But I like the guys they added last class. I like where they are, and they're not. I don't believe they're done. I don't believe they intend to be done, I should say, right now in the class of 2025 on the defensive line. So we'll see if they can add any to that. But this is a good start for Terrence Jameson in this recruiting class, and those are 2 good wins.
Yeah, I love the start for the defensive line, and now they get to swing for Derek Simmons, a guy we've talked about we love.
This is awesome.
6'3", 270, 280. Just has that quick twitch at his size, plus a tenacity and power that I think he's underrated. And Illinois was the first Power 5 offer for him. Can sell Johnny Newton. So maybe you have a chance there, even though you're battling Purdue and all these other Big Ten programs, Michigan State, his home state school. And then Jaquan Stubbs, who I think is Jihad Ward-like with his ability, his length, his raw potential. He's not as refined as some of these other guys. So I think he's a little bit of a project, but he's 6'5", 6'6", 265 pounds, just really, really, really long. So could really play that 4-eye technique incredibly well. If you had one of those guys, I think it's an exclamation point. But talking about development, Joey, I don't know if there's a coach I trust more on the staff, maybe outside of Bart Miller, when it comes to developing than Terrence Jameson. Johnny Newton is obviously his masterpiece, right? That he helped develop. But there's a lot of natural talent there. I think we saw that simmering before, he arrived, Terrence Jameson arrived, but he got the most out of him, helped him become an All-American. And Johnny raves about, what JMO brought to him. Keith Randolph, 3-time All Big Ten honoree. But when it comes to Isaiah White, that nose tackle position, they have developed incredibly well. I mean, I did date back to Roderick Perry, was an All Big Ten honorable mention guy. In the 1 year he played nose tackle for Illinois. Calvin Avery, who we're all kind of waiting, is he going to actually break through? His senior year on that number 1 defense in the country, he was really good at that nose tackle position. Then last year, Denzel Daxon might be the best development story that we have seen under Terrence Jameson, because this guy was a rotational player at Ohio. JMO saw something in him, still kind of raw, coming from, out of the country, and then becomes a great prospect in Florida, goes to Miami, didn't play a lot there, transfers to Ohio. So he obviously had some talent there, but JMO turns him into a Big Ten starter, like a really quality Big Ten starter. That nose tackle position takes a lot of tenacity, a lot of strength. You're taking on double teams. You're not going to get a lot of flash plays, Joey, but they are so important to let everyone else in that defense do their job, to stop the run. And I think Isaiah White is just the kind of perfect guy to add to that mix, along with Warren and Eddie Turk and Anichi Sledge. They got a lot of talent at that nose tackle position, and that's a really underrated position in this defense.
Yeah, it's a really underrated position, and as you mentioned, a little bit overlooked in how good Terrence Jameson has been at developing that position. I mean, Denzel Daxon signed as an undrafted free agent. If he got another year at Illinois, he could have been a draft pick. Yeah. He could have been a late-round draft pick, because I think he was just starting to really scratch what he could be there. And if you think about when they added him, you and I didn't think that. Like, okay, hey, a rotational guy. We thought T.Y. Edwards was going to win the job and be the starting nose tackle throughout the course of the season. And Denzel Daxon came in and really grabbed a hold of that. So, that's a position that you probably want to buy into if in Terrence Jameson's development. So, yeah, man, his development is really, really impressive. The way he helps those guys, as you mentioned, Johnny Newton. Obviously Terrence Jameson played a role in that. Johnny Newton would tell you that. And Terrence Jameson would say, hey, that guy had a ton of talent, and I just really didn't want to mess it up, right? And Keith Randolph, a ton of talent, still really raw when the coaching staff got there, and they really helped him ultimately land as non-drafted free agent for the Chicago Bears, and probably would have been drafted had he not been injured last season. So now that you're seeing the recruiting and they're winning some of those battles, that's picking up. Man, Terrence Jameson's a huge asset for this coaching staff. A huge, huge asset. It's the reason he got bumped to a co-defensive coordinator title and a pay raise that comes with it. And he's a guy you want to keep Terrence Jameson around as long as you can keep Terrence Jameson around, because he's really, really, really good at his job. And hey, look, I don't know that Purdue was itching to get rid of him when Brett Bielema hired him away either. Like, that wasn't something they were like, yeah, well, whatever. Like, he's a good coach. He's a really, really good coach. And a lot of people around the country know that.
Yeah, and when Michigan came open, there was a concern. Like, could they steal him? And this is why it's really important that you keep a guy like him. Or could he be an NFL candidate someday? I think he can, because of his development and the way he kind of, he's just a tactician. Like, all these guys just come out like as real tacticians on the defensive line. That's going to be really important this year, right? As they get some of these, they lose Newton, they lose Randolph, they lose Dax, and they have kind of these unproven guys. That's going to be really important, Terrence Jameson, to this year. And then Cam Brooks, like, I gotta be honest, when I see his film, good prospect, good Power 5 prospect, reminds me of Sed McConnell a little bit, and I feel like he's just scratching the surface a little bit. I think he's got some versatility to his game, but Sed was kind of this tweener. Is he an edge? Is he a 3 technique? You knew he had edge strength and build up, and his coach told you he's up to 295. That's a huge key for me. And if he's up to there and as athletic, he does rise in my mind of what I think he can be. But I think he can be a solid Big Ten impact defensive lineman, and you keep him in state. I think it's a big recruiting win over Kansas State, and Iowa had offered here recently. Yeah,
you can't lose him. The effort you put into him, you identified him, you were his first offer. He's in state. He's just a kid you couldn't have lost. And it did feel like it was trending towards Illinois for a while. You've had the crystal ball in forever, right? But Kansas is a program that's on the rise. Kansas looks like a good program. Kansas State, obviously, you've seen the success they've had. So to get that just done and over with on that first official, you don't have to sweat out the next couple weekends of him headed to the state of Kansas and seeing what else is, what's over there. That's a big win. Like, you just had to do that with the effort you put in at that position in the state of Illinois. Like, it needed done, and credit to them for coming in and closing down and getting that done.
It's a good weekend. It's a really good weekend. Yeah. Of course, they had other visitors here, Joey. Jesse Harold, 4-star, top 100, outside linebacker out of Florida. Donovan Darden, I think he's a 4-star caliber prospect currently, a very high 3-star out of North Carolina, outside linebacker. 4-star East St. Louis defensive back Charles Bass, our running back John Forster, 4-star composite running back out of New Jersey, and then linebacker TJ Alford, top 100 linebacker, currently committed to Ohio State, out of Florida, Vero Beach, where Illinois has a lot of ties. Go wherever you want. What intrigues you most of what is left out there after the official visit weekend?
I think there's two edges sitting out there that you need. Like, we talked about that position. We both mentioned Clint Senham last week as a guy that we were really curious to see what this was going to look like for him. And I caught up with Jesse Harold. He was kind enough to call me back. It was like 11 o'clock his time. It was a long day of travel for him. He's in the early stages of this. Remember, he was a guy who didn't have Power 4 offers in the fall. And then this thing just flew. I mean, absolutely flew. He liked the relationship, the consistency Clint Senham, Illinois, their coaching staff had with him. He said, I'm going to go give him a chance. I'm going to go visit them. It's just so early. Like, for a top 100 guy, like, usually they know the lay of the land a little bit because they've been recruited since they were 14. It's taken a little bit. I think he's just trying to observe all of this and what this is. He's got big time visits coming up still, right? With UCF, with LSU, with A&M. He's going to go. He's going to go get the full star treatment on those visits. So we'll see what that looks like. But there's two good edges sitting out there still that, I'm curious if they can reel one of those guys in and close down one of those recruitments. And that would, be a big win for Clint Senham, right? I mean, at a position that we've talked about, top heavy now, but you do want to see them continue to add more long-term guys after some of the departures that they've had. So we'll see how that plays out, but those are two really talented guys they had on campus at the same time.
Yeah, and I know there's an extra star next to Harold's name. I would be as equally excited if I were an Illinois fan of getting Darden. He is a freak athlete, just a freak athlete. You put on some of his basketball film, it's ridiculous. His arms are ridiculously long, just a great athlete that you feel like they can develop. Charles Bass, the Missouri visit looms large. I think Illinois, if it's down to them in Arkansas, he's visited both those schools. I'd feel good about where Illinois would be there. But Missouri looms large. Like East St. Louis, I know is in Illinois. That is SEC territory. Like those kids are thinking of SEC, and Missouri is such a big brand down there. They're coming off such a great year. And I know Illinois has had their run of defensive backs, but Missouri's had some really good, I think they had 3 defensive backs, at least 2 of them drafted this past year. The guy I'm really interested in is John Forster. 4-star running back. Rutgers has been in there. His coach was a assistant at Rutgers. They fired him a year ago. So could that work in Illinois' favor? Will be interesting. But obviously Illinois has a great sell for running backs. Brett Bielema has a great sell for running backs. And Thad Ward is a really good recruiter, and he's done a really good job with Forster. So Rutgers remains in the mix. He's got some other official visits here coming up, including Wisconsin. But I like where the Illini stand there. So it might come down to the wire, but that's one that I'm really interested to see what happens over the next couple of weeks. And then kind of like you did with Harold and Darden, I feel like those visits were, let's set this up. Let's make a big impression that lasts and see if we can win this in the back half of the month, maybe early in July. Because Darden's got an official visit to Pittsburgh and then South Carolina. South Carolina is the one close to home, being from North Carolina. But TJ Alford, getting an Ohio State commit on campus, when you got great connections to that Vero Beach program, Nathan Gwynn, the tight end, is from there. Amar Reynolds is from there. Their head high school coach and Brett Bielema go way back. So there's a really good, kind of correlation. Just to get him on campus, I think is a huge win, and see where it goes, Joey. Because I do think they have a lot of, opportunity on that defense at linebacker. I think he's a guy that can play right away and really push James Kreutz and Kenena Odeluga and Dylan Rosiak if he were to come here. But that's a good sign just to see you're getting in on that kind of talent and have a chance. Because even if you don't win it, maybe it pays off in 2 or 3 years. I think we always have to think of that. But to get that kind of talent on campus is really good.
Yeah, a couple future shot visits, right? Just as Brett Bielema said, get them here and let them maybe experience what they didn't know existed at Illinois. And they really do believe in what they have inside of that Smith Center. Let's talk about John Forster real quick. Yep. He did not commit to Rutgers after his official visit, which was prior to Illinois. And you'll note, everybody committed to Rutgers after their official visits that weekend. That was a huge weekend for Rutgers football recruiting. And John Forster, local kid, was not one of those guys. He visited Illinois. We'll see how that plays out. But I do find it funny, and maybe it was fortunate timing for Brett Bielema yesterday on social media when the Big Ten Network, their Big Ten Twitter account, tweeted out videos of his 3-headed monster at Wisconsin running backs doing what they did, and they ran a lot, and they ran very effectively. And Brett Bielema,
Monty Ball, James White, Melvin Gordon all ran for 990 plus yards in the same season.
And as you would imagine, Jeremy, Brett Bielema saw that, quote tweeted it, and put that out there. And some of it sure was probably celebrating the season that those guys had, and some of it was probably maybe a wink and a nudge to Mr. John Forster to say, Caden Fagan, Khalil Valentine, we can't have 4-star guys sitting in this running back room, and all of you guys can have success. I don't believe, Jeremy, that was on accident that he did that. So, the sell makes sense, right? It would make sense for him. And Illinois, clearly, Brett Bielema, for as much as he has pushed back correctly, we've seen that play out over the course of his tenure, that this isn't just a 3 yards in a cloud of dust offense like some people would like to associate with Illinois and Brett Bielema. They obviously passed away around that narrative last season, but they can still be effective running the ground. They're running the ball. They still want to run the ball, and they can still do it with multiple backs. And I think that was maybe a wink and a nod towards the state of New Jersey when he posted that.
The other thing I wanted to mention here, there's a family angle of this because they just offered David Forster, who's a 2028 player out of New Jersey. Happens to be John's little brother who was on the official visit. And from what I heard, the Forster family came in force. Like they had to buy extra plane tickets because they had so many people that were coming on this visit. So I think that's a really good sign for Illinois. But David Forster, by the way, is like 6'4" already, 200 and something pounds. So he's probably like an edge or a wide receiver or something like that down the line. But just another angle of that. we haven't hit on Davion Chandler yet very much, besides him actually getting here. Love this addition. I talked about it last week. He was like the 3-star I said fans shouldn't overlook, because what he brings on film is what Illinois really lacks, which he's got a little size. He's 5'11", 6 foot, so he's not incredibly short, right? So he's got a little bit of size to him. Needs to keep adding strength, especially when it comes to the physicality of the Big Ten and that press coverage. But his speed is legit. He had a 4.56 laser as a high school junior. That is really, really good. But his separation ability, his acceleration, both off the line of scrimmage and then after the catch. Illinois just hasn't had a lot of after the catch guys who can burn and get away from people. Isaiah Williams could get open, and a few times he got over the top. But I think we saw what kept him from getting drafted was that lack of 4.5 speed. He's a 4.6 guy. So to have that, Illinois just needs more speed. Kenari Wilcher potentially can be that guy. Maybe Mario Sanders. We haven't really seen him play. But Hank Beatty's more of like the crafty, get open guy. Really good route runner, reliable hands. They need more speed. I think they need more speed with a little bit of height to it. So Davion Chandler, like, they just haven't had that burner in a really long time. Like, Justin Hardy was the last one I could think of, and he was injured throughout his career. But AJ Jenkins was the true, like, last speed guy that dominated for Illinois. So I think Davion Chandler has that kind of, potential. Like, somebody on our board comped him, and I want to give him credit. I think it was RP, comped him like Will Pauling at Wisconsin, who's one of the best returning Big Ten wide receivers. Yeah, I think so. But Davion's got a little bit more height to him. So, like, that kind of player would be what Justin Stepp obviously wanted. Joey, we know he wanted more speed in that room, and Chandler fits that need.
Yeah, absolutely. They have a lot of big physical wide receivers right now who lack that breakaway speed. Like Malik Elzy is very physical. He's very big. He's not slow by any stretch of the imagination, but he doesn't have that kind of speed. If I'm remembering right, with Ashton Hollins would be a guy who's probably the closest with the speed and the height pairing. They fell in love. Yeah, they fell in love with that speed that he had when they saw him at a camp, and that's obviously parlayed into getting him on campus committed and in their wide receiver room. But otherwise, they lack that true breakaway. Watch Chandler's film. Granted, these are high school kids, right? But he catches a slant, and he just runs literally everybody. There's not a human being anywhere close to him as he breaks down the field. So, yeah, that was what this receiver room has been missing. I think it was something Justin Stepp identified early when he got to Illinois. Like, I would like to get more of that. You pair Chandler with a Braden Trimble, who isn't slow by any stretch of the imagination, but probably more crafty than fast. And I think that's a good pairing long term. And those are two good wide receiver wins. Like, that is a good 3 weeks for Justin Stepp. And we will get into it later. We will see if that gets better over the course of the next 10 or so days.
Zakhari Franklin.
But man, Justin Stepp has been really interesting during this cycle. And I think you're seeing that success he had at South Carolina, the development he's had of wide receivers, that's paying off. And pair that with what Barry Lunny and Illinois showed offensively last year, and like it's becoming a more attractive destination for wide receivers. And back to Chandler, yeah, the speed is just something else.
I mean, when it comes to the new assistants, and it's early, Justin Stepp has made the clearest early impact here with Trimble. Now, these other guys got time, and as we said, Symptom's got a chance, and Archie McDaniel with TJ Alford's got a chance, and Corey Parker with Charles Bass and some of these other guys has a chance. But really good start for Justin Stepp. Really good recruiter for them. All right, Joey, let's look ahead. Obviously, those guys, outside linebacker, big need remaining in this class. Get another defensive lineman, could use another DB. But like, what are you kind of looking for coming up here over the next couple of weeks? As they got about 10 more official visitors that we know about at this point. Keys, needs, what are you kind of looking at moving forward?
Yeah, first off, I think I'm going to go back to an edge, because you're in the market for some big fish there at the edge. And again, I think it's a huge position long-term that you need to keep stacking, because it's an important position to this defense. Honorable mention to defensive back, because you're going to start seeing more defensive backs, if I'm not mistaken, on the visitor list start to find their way through, and many of which are in that Florida weekend, which we know Illinois has done well with the state of Florida and getting some of those guys. So I think those are the two for me. Good for Bart Miller. It feels like he's got a put your feet up type of month of June. I'm curious now that Darren Stray is committed to Kentucky, what that looks like, how they're going to approach that if they want to add another offensive lineman here in the class of 2025. But to me, it's pretty easily. Yes, that's right. So to me, it's pretty easily edge and defensive back, Jeremy.
Yeah. And then running back, I'll be interested to see what happens if they get Forster. Otherwise, they have Cedric White, who's another Forster. We didn't mention this. I've kind of compared to Josh Ferguson with his receiving ability, his ability to just kind of make plays in space. Cedric White's out of St. Thomas Aquinas. It's another powerhouse down in Florida.
That Brett Bowman knows well.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same thing, same kind of back. So if they don't get Forster locked up, I feel like they'd be in a good spot with Cedric there. And then you mentioned it. It's kind of Florida weekend with all these DBs. The next 2 weekends, Max Redman and Caden Gordon visiting over the next couple weeks. And then you have Robert Jones was supposed to visit, but he no longer is likely visiting. Jershawn Newton, who could play safety or linebacker, those guys are visiting. So, yeah, it feels like that Florida connection, and then the defensive lineman. So defensive line, defensive back, and a linebacker and edge, right? It's mostly defense. I feel like they need plus a running back.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And running back almost just feels like let's just keep stacking. Like that's not a need long term with Caden Fagan and Aiden Lawfrey and Khalil Valentine. But if you can add a 4-star on top of that, or a really talented player, of course you want to do that. And you want to add another running back every class, I would think. So that just feels like, not as much of a priority, but you've got a chance to really improve that room with some of the guys you're in on. But defense is probably set up a little bit like that, right? With, they've typically gone to Florida for defensive players. Aaron Henry in particular likes the mindset of defensive backs and the approach, the physicality that he sees out of the guys that they have and the connections they have in the state of Florida. So when we say defense, this isn't like, the first weekend was such a wreck defensively. They've got to – it felt like it was kind of set up for that. It felt like it was kind of set up to really address defense later in this month of June.
Yeah, they added 2 defensive linemen this past
week. Right,
weekend.
that's right. Yeah.
So they've definitely done it. It's just they got some of their skill positions and offensive linemen locked up pretty early. But yeah, I feel like they'd like to get 5 or 6 more over the next couple weeks and then see how much scholarship space they have or how much the roster limit actually is in the NCAA. Because if the NCAA roster limit moving forward is going to be 100, then they'll probably add 5 more high school kids and hit the transfer portal hard. Otherwise, it feels like they are pretty narrowly focused, and that's what landing some of these other guys, these defensive linemen, especially wide receiver, allows you to kind of narrow your focus even more on the guys who just visited, keep hitting at them while they're taking these other visits. And then, get your other guys in here late in the month and try to close on them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I still think Illinois does this right, and they do official visits well. And some of these guys will be the last crack or one of the last maybe cracks, the last visits, and we'll see if that plays out for Illinois and how that goes. I don't know, like, bring that up. I wanted to ask you, like, I don't know that everyone says, I'm glad to be the first or I'm glad to be the last. I don't think it matters. I think what matters is the 4 months, 2 years, whatever the case was that you put in before you get those guys on campus. But if you want to look at it like this, the last weekend is, hey, maybe some of those spots that they visited earlier in the month of June have filled up. Like maybe if you weren't number one, suddenly your number one is full at your position. And if you're first, obviously you can jump on board and secure your spot and not have to think twice about it. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, but it does feel like there's some benefit either way.
That reminds me of like the Sean Miller recruitment. Like I know Sean made a huge big impact, but like he kind of went through his visits and all of a sudden it was like, how many options does he have? And Illinois was one of his top options. And I think it was kind of like one of the last options that was like top of mind for him that was really available. So yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. The other position I'm really interested in is tight end. Like it's just been a position that they haven't gotten a lot of traction for anybody in this class. So, Robbie Disher's really kind of gotten under the radar guys. And I think Jake Furtney was a phenomenal walk-on. Tanner Hollinger, I think, has a really interesting ceiling. But it's just they haven't gotten a lot of traction for Power 5 prospects at that position. And you got this Tip Ryman sell. So I'm interested to see where they go at that position. You do have Cole Rusk for 2 more years. You got those guys coming in to develop, but you just haven't heard a lot of traction yet at that position, which will be
skip 25 and just focus on 26. There's too many good 26 tight ends out there. You're fine. Focus all your attention on 2026, Robbie Disher.
Mr. J.C. Anderson out of Mount Zion would be a big one, but you got some top competition for him. All right, Zakhari Franklin watch, Joey. It is June 11th, and we don't know yet where Zakhari Franklin will enroll at school, at least publicly. Has not announced anything quite yet. He has visited Illinois. He has visited Washington. He has kept things very, very quiet. But we heard Brett Bielema give a little tease last week that they got one more guy in offense they'd like to add, and they feel pretty good about it. He just can't announce it quite yet. I think Zakhari Franklin and Illinois are in a good spot. I think all along it's made a lot of sense for Zakhari Franklin to end up at Illinois, given Barry Lunny is here. He knows the offense. Given that they have a starting spot that he knows he would have here and an offense that he has been very, very productive in and could seamlessly transition into there. And for Illinois, they need another guy. Like, you feel like this offense could be really, really good. This passing offense could be really, really good with Luke Altmaier, Pat Bryant, and more dynamic tight end room and offensive line that is deeper. Zakhari Franklin just feels like that guy who could elevate you. So I feel good. I mean, Brett Bielema feels like he called the shot the other day, but it sounds like Zakhari could be at his school as early as this month, and that I just think Illinois is in a really good spot there.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. Nothing has changed in my belief that it makes that sense. He's had his best success of his career with Barry Lunny Jr. That's his coordinator. He knows the offense. Barry Lunny knows him. Barry Lunny knows what works for Zakhari Franklin, what doesn't work for Zakhari Franklin. I would be willing to bet that came up when he was on campus. That, like, man, they've done this. Put the record back on and see what you can go do again. And I think, eventually if there's, if it calls for it, we'll get into the weeds of what that would mean for Illinois, but it's a needle mover. He would be a total needle mover if Illinois were to land him. And you pair that, you look at what they were able to do in the spring. If they get Franklin, they really improve their roster if they land him, right? Like that is a huge step forward. You just got to see if it happens. And I do feel like Brett Bielema gave the tease, and all that was missing was like the Jim Halpert stare into the camera while we were all filming that. Yeah. Oh man, don't do that again. But yeah, man, we'll see. And it does feel like you're getting to the point that this has got to happen sooner than later, right? I mean,
next week,
I say that.
I would say in the next week, we should know. You would have liked to have known publicly earlier, but I feel like within the next week, we should know. And I just haven't heard any panic on the Illinois side of things. And I just think they're in a really good spot for him. And you just think about what he does. And we'll break it down more if it happens, and we'll have a reaction pod. But it just pushes everyone else down. It pushes everyone else into a role that I feel more comfortable about. Like, I think Malik Ellis is going to make a big impact next year. But to have him as a number 3 wideout compared to like a top 2 wideout, I feel like that puts him in better position to succeed because he's going to get better matchups. And I feel like it puts your team in better position to succeed because those growing pains I expect from him that every receiver, Pat Bryant, has gone through the last couple of years, they're not as pronounced, right? And most of all, I just feel like it puts Luke Altmaier in a great position to succeed. Like, he is set up to be successful if he gets Zakhari Franklin with Pat Bryant, Zakhari, Malik Elzy, some guys in the slot that I feel like can add a speed element. You've added 2 pass catching tight ends this offseason in Carson Goda and Cole Rusk. You've built up an offensive line that can maybe sustain an injury or 2, actually. And I don't feel like he's going to take a huge step back. Even if I don't know if anybody is quite as good as Isaiah Adams on the interior, I feel like you have some good players on the interior. And you guys know how I feel about J.C. Davis coming into this. I just feel like they have more options and more depth. Like, you'd be putting it on Luke Altmaier. It's like, hey, we've set you up for success. It's almost like a Caleb Williams kind of thing to me. It's where we have put all of this around him to succeed and for our team to succeed. So I'd feel really good if I were Luke Altmaier about what Illinois has done this offseason, especially if they add Zakhari Franklin to it.
Oh, it's a dream for Luke Altmaier, right? If they were to add Zakhari Franklin, and even just look at what they've done. I like the dynamic pass catchers they've added at the tight end room because they lack that, right? And in hindsight, maybe you could have used Tip Ryman more in that role. You also desperately needed Tip Ryman to sit at the line of scrimmage and not let Luke Altmaier get hit every time he touched the football.
Yeah, and as good as Tip is, he was much better as a pass catcher last year. He wasn't a dynamic threat down the field. Like, he did not do those things all that well. Arizona drafted him knowing that because he's so good at blocking, being physical, and he's still got an athletic potential that maybe he can be a solid pass catcher, but he's more underneath threat, right? Than guy who's going to go down the field, make catches on the sidelines, make catches in the seam.
Yeah, absolutely. And so adding a guy like Rusk is the one I'm watching more than Goder.
Yeah.
We'll see how that plays out. Obviously, there's a production level and a competition level difference between the two. We'll see if that can elevate this offense that was already starting to find its footing in the back half of last season. You'll remember the first half of last season was like, this is kind of rough sledding here. This isn't very good, and they found their footing. So we'll see. But yeah, they've surrounded Luke Altmaier, especially if they get Zakhari Franklin, with talented players that would help elevate him to the talent level that we know he has, and would help him put that production out on the football field. He's got to go out and do it, and they've got to obviously close on Franklin to really, really elevate that. But to your point about pushing everyone down, that's okay. That's okay. Like I know
programs do.
Yes, look, if Illinois gets a commitment from Zakhari Franklin, we're going to have a live pod. You and I have talked about, like, we plan on if things happen. Otherwise, you're chasing yourself, and it's not. Someone in the comments is inevitably going to say, well, Malik Elzy is leaving, or what's this mean for Malik Elzy? It means Malik Elzy can progress at a natural speed. And guess what?
It means Malik Elzy is still playing 400 to 500 snaps next year.
Yes. And hey, guess what? If Malik Elzy proves he should be on the field more, he will be. Brett Bielema wants to win football games. If Malik Elzy deserves to be on the field, he will be. And he's still going to be in line for a heavy role here.
And if Malik Elzy is a top 3 receiver, you know what might happen? Pat Bryant moves to the slot. Zakhari Franklin plays some snaps in the slot. And Hank Beatty and Mario Sanders and Kenari Wilcher, they have to fight for their snaps. Like, you add good players, the coaches find out, get your best 11 on the field, get your best packages on the field, and figure out how you can win football games. That's what it is. Yeah,
like Franklin incrementally played more in the slot at UTSA under Barry Lundy. Not a lot, but over the course of the 2 years, those, I think it got up to maybe like 16%. Certainly not a lot because he's not a true slot wide receiver. Pat Bryant for 2 years has been telling us he wants to be more versatile, and he's mentioned the slot. Like, don't get so bogged down in that because those guys could do it, but you wouldn't have put Pat Bryant in the slot last year because Isaiah Williams was there. There's no reason to do that.
And what is Pat Bryant and Zakhari Franklin really good at? It's those slant routes. Like, you just think of Zakhari, just bang, bang, bang. They're like all slant routes. He can go down the field and make contested catches, but he's just so good at getting open on those slant routes. The offense allows that, and if you have those two, like you have Zakhari at 6'1", 185, 190, or Pat Bryant at 6'3", 200 pounds against a nickel corner, like running, like just a big body. Luke Altmaier, throw it on him. He's going to catch the ball, get 7 yards, 8 yards, have a chance to make a play after the catch. That's what Barry Lundy's offense did at UTSA.
Yeah, and it's very similar offense. So I just like the pieces, especially if they get him. I like the pieces without. I do think if they were to land Zakhari Franklin, it moves so much in terms of what this offense can be. But they're putting Luke Altmaier in a position to be the best version of Luke Altmaier. He's got to go out and do that. But the talent around him is there. You still need health at running back. You still need the idea of this offensive line to really blossom on the football field. I have faith in Bart Miller as an offensive line coach. I like the pieces they have there. They're surrounding him with the opportunity to be as good as he can be and put up some points on offense.
The other thing I would add, inevitably, if Donovan Leary has to play, he's surrounded by playmakers that I think he can succeed with, right? Like that, you're not counting on Donovan Leary to be Luke Altmaier and make plays with his legs. Like, you can have an offense that, like, hey, if he can get the ball out like John Paddock, you have the playmakers that you can still be a dynamic offense that, Brett Bielema had a bunch of quarterbacks at Wisconsin that weren't the most mobile before Russell Wilson, and they were really successful because they had some really good weapons around them. So with the running backs, we feel like that's a good position. We feel like they're going to produce because we don't see the injury bug being quite as bad as last year, especially with Fagan and Lawfrey. But you had another dynamic receiver to that. I just feel really good about that, what it does for the quarterbacks.
I'm just trying to imagine like 2018 A.J. Bush or 2019 Brandon Peters looking at the weapons that this team would have offensively. What the heck, man? Like, it is so much. It's starkly better from that late Lovey, early Brett Bielema tenure.
Yeah, because I was looking back and just going through some of those receiver rooms because I was looking for like a burner, right? And And no disrespect to Donnie Navarro, who was like a godsend for those teams because he could just get open and make contested catches. He was not a burner. Like, and he was like your number 2 wideout. Like, that receiver room is taking a big step forward. All right, Joey, let's wrap this thing up. Anything else you want to hit on that Brett Bielema talked about last week, and anything football related?
It's kind of a grab bag sometimes with those summer media sessions with Brett Bielema. I wanted to touch on the health. He was asked about the health, and obviously there were a number of guys held out from spring. Sounds like everyone is good to go except for Kenenna Odeluga and James Cruz. Odeluga, Brett Bielema said by the end of July, he would expect Odeluga to be full go. James Cruz might push closer into the start of or right before fall camp. That's a good sign. I still, it's one of those, Caden Fagan, if this were week 8, maybe you see more of him, but it's spring ball for a guy who played a good amount of snaps. Like, I think missing spring ball, you don't want to, but it's not the end of the world, right? It's such a precautionary thing, but just to know that those guys, they should open fall camp, as far as we know, with not that we'll see, with a degree of, being as healthy as they have been. So that was a positive sign to hear from Brett Bielema.
Yeah. They got some camps coming up, 3 camps in the next week with some prospects, usually the younger guys or some guys that they really want to take a look at. We'll see if they got any late 2025 guys they want to see on campus. But they did not take part in the satellite camps this year. They want to be with their roster. They want to focus on recruiting on campus. I feel like it's a bigger impact when they get those players in their own camps on campus and get to look at them the way they want to. So be interesting over the next couple of weeks to see if they offer anybody from those camps, see if they can build some relationships from those. But then, of course, you got a couple more official visitors. So we'll have all the coverage of that at IlliniInquirer.com. We'll have all the latest on Zakhari Franklin, as well as Illinois tries to wrap up that 2024 roster with a bang. All right, that'll do it. For Joey Wagner, I'm Jeremy Werner. Thank you for listening to the Illini Inquirer Podcast. Thanks for watching on YouTube. If you did, give us a like, follow, rating, review, wherever you get your podcasts as well. Hit the notifications bell on our YouTube channel as well. We appreciate you guys. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer Podcast.